Hello and welcome to another 8-bit episode of Showcase. Licensed games have a pretty bad reputation, especially the ones on the NES. Not totally undeserved, since a pretty huge number of them are total garbage, but there's also a lot of surprisingly good ones. So instead of adding to the proverbial trash dump of videos about bad licensed NES games, let's talk about a few of the good ones. I think we're all well aware of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the NES. You know, the one AVGN covered. Well, there was a sequel to that game that not many people seem to talk about. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, released about a year after the first NES game, and as you could probably guess, is a port of the arcade game. Not to be confused with Turtles in Time, which is a sequel to the arcade game that this is a port of. First off, I apologize for my awful gameplay, but this is a beat 'em up, and as much as I love the things, I'm awful at them. Now, being a beat 'em up, this game's not incredibly complex. You walk through the level and beat the crap out of waves of enemies. Speaking of the enemies, just in the first level, there's a pretty good amount of variety. You've got a couple different types of Foot Clan ninjas, these incredibly annoying robots, and Glacius from Killer Instinct. And defeating those enemies is always incredibly satisfying, since the controls for TMNT 2 are really tight and responsive. The only complaint with them I really have is that your movement speed feels really slow, even compared to most beat-em-ups. It really doesn't help that I couldn't find a way to run, so the levels feel a pretty good amount longer than they really are. This is no Turtles in Time, but if you're looking for a solid TMNT game on the NES, this is the way to go. There was also a third game called the Manhattan Project, but it's not quite as good. When it comes to good licensed games on the NES, one of the first games that people will usually think of is DuckTales, and while that game is very good, there's another duck-related licensed game that I personally prefer. Based on the TV show of the same name, Darkwing Duck came out on the NES in 1992. Now this game may look a bit familiar to you, perhaps it reminds you of a certain blue bomber. Well, that's because not only is it made by Capcom, but it also runs on a modified version of the Mega Man 5 engine. Because of that, it plays a lot like Mega Man. There are a few differences here though. For one, the controls aren't quite as refined as in a Mega Man game, so most things are a bit more finicky than you might be used to. Darkwing also has a couple of abilities that Mega Man didn't. For one, he can duck to avoid some incoming projectiles or hit enemies that are lower to the ground, and he can use his snazzy cape to block attacks. It's not useful all the time, but it does make dealing with these Sniper Joe guys a lot easier. The game's also pretty tough, since unlike Mega Man where you have this giant health bar letting you take a lot of hits, you only have 4 hits before you die. This is especially noticeable in boss fights because they take a lot of damage, to the point where some bosses, like Moriarty, just drag on. But I don't feel that any of these problems greatly diminish the game's quality, and it still stands as one of my personal favorite NES games. For our third and final game, we head over to Japan for Chojin Sentai Jetman, based on the 15th entry in the Super Sentai series. This game's a pretty simple platformer, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on it here. Basically, you travel through 6 stages battling the show's main antagonists, an interdimensional organization called Vyram. The variety of normal mooks is pretty low, consisting mainly of these generic guys that either run at you or stay stationary and shoot you, but each stage does have a couple of unique enemies, like these turrets, or whatever the hell this floating thing is. To keep the gameplay varied up a little bit, at the end of every stage is a fight in the team's mech against a monster from the show. If you've ever played the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers SNES game, specifically the Megazord stages, then you know how these fights operate. Thanks to being on the Famicom, they're not quite as involved as the Megazord battles, but they're still pretty fun despite their simplicity. If you plan on playing this game, I highly suggest playing as either White Swan or Blue Swallow, since they have guns, so they don't need to get right up next to enemies to hit them. Yellow Owl also has a ranged weapon, but it doesn't go quite as far as Blue Swallow or White Swans, so I don't think it's quite as useful. But if you haven't played Chojin Sentai Jetman, then I'd highly suggest giving it a shot, since it's probably one of the best licensed games on the NES and gets basically no recognition. Hey, thanks for watching yet another video, another one that I actually managed to get out about a week after my last one. I've been getting kinda good at that, and it's immediately gonna slow down since I'm moving soon, again. But hopefully it won't knock me out of the trend of making stuff like it did when I moved last year. But that's not the important part. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to recommend a couple of others. First one on the left is going to be the last video I did. It was a video on TV shows that were canceled after their first episode. A lot of them are weird. One of them is potentially offensive, so you should probably enjoy that. And then on the right is going to be the video I did before that, because why not? a video I did on nostalgic PS2 games. It's basically just 18 minutes of me rambling. So there's that. And if you want to stay updated on any future videos that I make, then you can subscribe to the channel. And you can get notified when I make a new one, because shilling. Or you can follow me on Twitter, where I usually post about when I'm going to make one. Except this one, I didn't tweet anything about it because it was just kind of a last minute thing, and I didn't really have anything interesting to say about it. But usually I tweet about when I make a video, other times I tweet about just bullshit. So yeah. But that's going to be it for now, and I will see you guys next time.